Hello and welcome back to the Brief Earth Creates YouTube channel. Today I am sharing my first YouTube video for the year 2021. And today I'm making a light up card for the Instagram collaboration hub between Pear Blossom Press, Sassy Crafty Stamps, and Doodles Paper Playground. First, I'm stamping a row of houses using the house stamp from the Shake It Up Baby stamp set from Sassy Crafty, using Tuxedo Black Memento ink, and I'm stamping onto some Nina white cardstock. I also created a mask of the house with Gina K masking paper so that the houses don't intersect on the lines. And I'm stamping a row of 5 houses. So, as mentioned previously, it's an Instagram collaboration between Sassy Crafty, Pear Blossom Press, and Doodles Paper Playground. They're hosting a giveaway, so make sure to check out my Instagram post with this card to see more information on the giveaway that closes January 11th. Okay, so on to the coloring of the houses. I'm going to make the houses in a rainbow. So I'm starting with the red house using R08 and then moving on to R05. And then R02. And then finishing up with R00. And then I'm going to go back through with the same sequence to kind of add more definition to the shadow areas. So the first house is going to be red, second house is going to be orange, middle house is yellow, green, and then blue. So I'm going back through on the first house with the R05, and then I'm finishing up the blending with the R02 on the second layer. And I decided to go back into the red house with the R37 to make the shadows a little bit more of a deep red so that there's more contrast between the first house and the second house. And then after I went in with the R37, I went through the sequence again just to blend the shadow out a little bit more. Finishing the first blend with the R02. Okay, now on to the second house, where I'm using the YR00 to add a base coat. Then I'm moving on to the YR07 to add some shadows. Adding a shadow underneath the roof, on the side of the door, on the side of the chimney, and then underneath the window. Then I'm going back in through with the YR02 and then finishing off the blend with the YR00. And then I go back into the shadow areas with the YR07 just to add more of a shadow. And then I decided to go back into the first house with the R37 just to deepen up the shadow a little bit more. Okay, now I'm moving on to the yellow house, where I'm first adding a base coat with the Y00, and then I'm starting my shadows with the Y08. Then I'm moving on to the Y06, then Y04, and Y02. The nice thing about stamping the image 5 times is once you've finished the first house, you kind of know where you want the shadows to go on the rest of the images. So I go back through with the Y08 just to redefine that shadow area. So onto the fourth house, the green house, I'm starting with the YG00 to add a base color. Then I am going in with the YG09 to add into the shadow areas. And then moving on to the YG07. Then YG05. YG03. And YG01. Then I go back through with the YG07 just to add more shadow once again. Okay, and on to the last house. I wanted to make the house more of a brighter blue-green, so I decided to use the BG colors. And so I'm adding a base coat with the BG 000, and then I'm going into the shadow areas with the BG 07. And then extending that shadow area with the BG 05. Moving on to the BG 02. Then with the BG 01. And then once again back in with the BG 07. And then one more time with the BG 05. The BG 02. And the BG 000. And there we go. There's the houses, all the rainbow houses all colored. Now we're moving on to the fussy cutting. First I'm going around the kind of the outer perimeter of the houses just to kind of cut off as much excess as possible. And then I'm going in between the roofs of the houses and the chimneys to get more of that smaller area. These houses are pretty easy to fussy cut. There's no little intricate details. They're pretty, elementary shapes with the rectangle roofs, or the rectangle chimneys and the, triangle roofs. Okay, now moving on to below the roofs and finishing up the fussy cutting. And that went really quick. Okay, so I want the houses to kind of sit towards the bottom of the card, but I used some purple tape to kind of mask off a section of the card that I want it to remain white. So I'm creating sort of a wintry night sky ink blend with Distress Oxide, Milled Lavender, Dusty Concord, and Chip Sapphire inks. I really like this blend. The Dusty Concord and the Chip Sapphire work together really well. So I started with kind of covering the lower portion of the card with the Milled Lavender, and then kind of went over the rest of the card with the Dusty Concord, but more of kind of an arc shape. And then I went back through with the Milled Lavender to kind of blend out between those two colors. And now I'm going back with the Dusty Concord ink to define that shadow area a little bit more, and then on to the third color, the Chip Sapphire. I really like how the Chip Sapphire and the Dusty Concord blend together because it looks more like a kind of a deep purple more than a blue to me. Now I'm going back through with the Dusty Concord to try and blend out, to smooth out the blend between Chip Sapphire and Dusty Concord. And then I'm going back through with the Milled Lavender to finish out that blend. And then I'm using my Distress Sprayer to add some kind of water specks onto the front of the card. And then I'm using Dusty Concord ink to add some ink splattering effects to the front as well. Once I finish ink splattering with the dusty Concord, I'm using some white acrylic paint and water to add some white splatters to the card front as well. Okay, now that I let that dry for a little bit, I pulled off the mask and you can see there's a nice white area for the sentiment, and I'm using some art glitter liquid glue to adhere the row of houses to the card front. And I want to set it just right above that white area. And make sure it's in the center and it's pressed all nicely. And then I'm going to be stamping the "There's no friend like you" sentiment into the white area of the card. I really like that pun. I'm going to use my Misty stamping platform to make sure that the sentiment is lined up exactly where I want it. And I'm going to stamp the sentiment with some pigment black ink so that it gets a nice solid crisp stamping. I'm going to go back through one more time with the black pigment ink to stamp the sentiment. Okay, now moving on to the construction of the light up portion. So I initially thought that I could cut all the holes with my crocodile, not thinking, but then I had to go through and cut a hole with a poker tool into the middle house window. But I'm only creating holes within the 2 outer houses and the center window, so it wasn't too much of a hassle. I'm just going back through with my fussy cut scissors to kind of clean out that middle house just a little bit more. Okay, now I'm gonna line up the card base and the card front, and I'm gonna use a pencil to trace those openings onto the card base. Now that I've traced the openings, I'm going to glue some vellum to the back of the card front, so that way the lights are kind of covered up more and those holes aren't as noticeable. So I'm using some easy lights from Pear Blossom Press to create the light up mechanism, which includes 3 lights, which are really tiny but they're really bright, as well as the kind of control push button. These easy lights make light up cards really easy to build. I'm going through right now with some micro glue dots. These glue dots will hold the light fixtures in place so that they line up perfectly with the holes in the card front. The wires can kind of get a little tangled, but you know, it only takes a minute to straighten them out. After I place the lights, I'm going to kind of bunch up the excess wires, and then I'm just going to use some plain Scotch tape to tape them down to the card base so that they're a little bit more managed. So the white paper is kind of nice to include because then, you know, you're making sure that the battery is not used up real quick. Okay, so now I'm going through with some thick, double-sided foam tape. The foam tape's needed to, you know, account for the height of the push button and the battery. I apologize because I do most of this off screen, so bear with me. But you want to make sure that you put foam tape pretty much all over the card so that the card doesn't kind of bend down or there's no spots where the card's dipping. Okay, now that I got the foam tape all over the card, I'm going to peel off the backing paper. And there we have it, a light up card. All the products that I used on this card are listed below, as well as my blog link, which has a little bit more details on this card and the other card that I made for the hop. For more information on the giveaway, check out my Instagram link, which is also listed below. Hope you come back soon. Thank you.